NHS Trust to allow Fuller to commit such awful crimes and to understand how his offending remained undetected for so long. When the then Secretary of State, the Right Honourable Sajid Javid, asked me to chair the inquiry, I was conscious of the responsibility of the role, as Fuller's crimes had caused shock and horror across our country and beyond. As a former NHS consultant and chief executive, I hoped that I could provide answers to the families of Fuller's victims by identifying what went wrong to allow the creation of an environment where Fuller was able to offend undetected for so long. I also wanted to help the Trust and all organisations charged with the oversight of the Trust and its mortuary services to understand, to acknowledge and to learn from what went wrong, and to take steps to ensure that nothing similar could ever happen again. The offences that Fuller committed were truly shocking, and he will never be released from prison. Failures of management, of governance, of regulation, failure to follow standard policies and procedures, together with a persistent lack of curiosity, all contributed to the creation of an environment where he was able to offend, and to do so for 15 years without ever being suspected or caught. This is not solely the story of a rogue electrical supervisor. Fuller's victims and their relatives were repeatedly let down by those at all levels whose responsibility it was to ensure that they were appropriately cared for and protected in the mortuary. Over the years, there were missed opportunities to question Fuller's working practices. He routinely worked beyond his contracted hours, undertaking tasks in the mortuary that were not necessary or which should not have been carried out by someone with his known chronic back problems. This was never properly questioned. There was little regard given to who was accessing the mortuary. Fuller himself entered the mortuary 444 times in a single year, and this went unnoticed and unchecked. Mortuary staff were mostly unsupervised and left to their own devices. They frequently did not follow policies and standard operating procedures. We heard that deceased people were left out of fridges in the post-mortem room, both overnight and during working hours when Fuller was carrying out maintenance tasks. He was not accompanied or supervised by mortuary staff at these times. Fuller sexually abused the deceased in the mortuary on 12 occasions during normal working hours, when mortuary staff should have been on duty. On their intermittent assessments, those responsible for the regulation of the mortuary often did not detect these systemic procedural failings. Despite the fact that the mortuary was one of a limited number of designated restricted areas in the hospital, it was in this uncontrolled environment that Fuller was able to offend undetected. Senior management of the Trust had been aware of problems with the running of the mortuary from as early as 2008, but there is little evidence that effective action was taken to remedy these issues or that the Trust board paid any attention to the mortuary. Requests for CCTV to be installed in the mortuary were not actioned for over a decade. Had his colleagues, managers and senior leaders been more curious, it is likely that he would have had less opportunity to offend. In January 2023, we received an allegation that an electrician had been sexually abusing the deceased in the mortuary at the Kent and Sussex Hospital in the late 1990s. I referred this allegation to Kent Police in line with our terms of reference. We were able to investigate it once the police had completed their inquiries. This uncovered a further allegation that bodies of the deceased were scalded in the mortuary in the late 1990s. We have not been able to confirm events behind these allegations. However, they illustrate that there were concerns about inappropriate behaviour in the mortuary at one of the predecessor organisations to the Maidstone and Tunbridge Wells NHS Trust some 7 years before Fuller is known to have sexually abused deceased women and girls in the mortuary. Although the failures took place over many years and during various management and regulatory regimes, I expect the current leadership of the Maidstone and Tunbridge Wells NHS Trust and those outside the Trust who are charged with oversight and regulation to reflect seriously and carefully on their responsibility for the weaknesses and failings that I have identified in this report and to implement my recommendations. The report makes 17 recommendations with the aim of preventing any similar atrocities happening again in the Trust. The recommendations follow from the evidence that we have heard and reviewed in the course of our work. We have held interviews with over 200 witnesses and reviewed more than 3,700 documents. I am satisfied that our detailed work and the cooperation we received from the Trust and from other interested parties has enabled the inquiry to reach robust and evidence-based conclusions. My recommendations include recommending that the Trust should ensure that non-mortuary staff and contractors, including maintenance staff employed by the Trust's external facilities management provider, are always accompanied by another staff member when they visit the mortuary. For example, maintenance staff should undertake tasks in pairs. I recommend that the Trust must assure itself that all regulatory requirements and standards relating to the mortuary are met, and that the practices of leaving deceased people out of mortuary fridges overnight or while maintenance is undertaken does not happen. I recommend that the Trust must review its policies to ensure that only those with appropriate and legitimate access can enter the mortuary. I recommend that CCTV cameras are installed in the mortuary and in the post-mortem room, and that the footage is reviewed regularly alongside records of who is accessing the mortuary and how often. And I recommend that the Trust Board must review its governance structures to make sure that the Board has greater oversight and assurance of legally regulated activity in the mortuary. Alongside this, the Trust must treat the deceased with the same due regard to dignity and safeguarding as it does its other patients. Had these and other measures that I am recommending been in place when Fuller was working at the Trust, I firmly believe his offending could have been prevented. I note that the Trust has improved its overall performance in recent years. Only this year, it was moved into the highest category of NHS England's performance monitoring system. The findings of this inquiry are in sharp contrast with that. Fuller committed 52% of his offences between the beginning of 2018 and his arrest in 2020, the same time period during which the Trust has seen rapid improvement in other areas of performance. This serves as a stark reminder that there may be serious hidden issues found in organisations that are apparently performing well. The fact that the Trust was apparently improving its overall performance does not in any way excuse the failings that allowed Fuller to offend. The thousands of staff who worked hard to provide high-quality care for patients across the Trust and had nothing to do with the running, the management and oversight of the mortuary will be justified in feeling let down by their colleagues who held these responsibilities. As the inquiry has been preparing and finalising this Phase 1 report, we have also begun our Phase 2 work looking at the broader national picture to understand the procedures and practices across the country which are in place to protect the deceased, not just in hospital mortuaries, but in other settings too. Central to this is an understanding whether we can be confident that offending such as Fuller's couldn't take place in other locations where bodies of the deceased are kept. Finally, I would like to reiterate my sincere thanks to the families of Fuller's victims for bravely sharing their feelings and experiences with us, and for their patience as we undertook the process of reviewing evidence and drafting this report. Thank you.